Welcome everyone. My name is Andy Saldana. I'm the Executive Director of New York Tech Alliance. Thank you for making it out this evening to this great event. This is our second event in a series that we're calling the Foundations of Entrepreneurship. Tonight's of course focusing on financing. The last one we had focused on creating your entity. And I'll try to, is that better? Good. And we have one scheduled in May at Google in partnership with Google to talk about marketing strategies. So I hope that you continue to come to these foundation events. And I just have a few housekeeping notes and thank yous to say, and then I'll turn it over to Paul Ellis, who will be moderating. First off, thank you to our wonderful roster of sponsors that help us do the work that we do. We are a nonprofit organization that is known for not only these events, but our monthly New York Tech Meetup event, where we showcase new and upcoming technologies to the ecosystem. Our goal is to really create access and equity within the ecosystem, with the focus on, of course, diversity, inclusion, education, and anything having to do with the New York Tech ecosystem. Our next event is on May 7th. It is our monthly New York Tech Meetup. It happens at Xander every month, and the theme for the May event is food and agriculture tech. We have a great lineup of amazing companies to showcase technology, everything from vertical farming to data analysis, hopefully a couple of hardware companies as well. So if you're interested, definitely check it out. It's always a great event. Tickets are available on our meetup page and at this link. Again, as I mentioned, on Thursday, May 30th, we're going to be doing our next event in the Foundations of Entrepreneurship series. It's two 1-hour workshops, one focused on design thinking for entrepreneurs, the other on online marketing. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely register as soon as you can. Those will fill up. And it's at the brand new Grow with Google space that's here for the summer. And then, again, thank you so much to EisnerAmper for being our host tonight. Round of applause for them. Not only are they hosts tonight, but they're a great supporter of the organization on an annual basis and allow us, again, to do such great work. I definitely recommend that you connect with someone on their team if you have any questions. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin from Gus Launch to say a few words. And thank you also for sponsoring this event.
Alright, awesome. We're very happy to be here. I'm Kevin from Gus Launch. I'm the gentleman handing out these envelopes on your chairs.
Microphone to you, as close to your mouth as possible.
Is that better?
Yes.
Alright, fantastic. So I want to play a quick video for you guys, but a quick intro. We help early stage companies to incorporate, raise funding, set up their cap table, really everything that you need to do. And we also work with about 15 different law firms right here in New York for everything that can't be done just through software. So I want to play a quick video, give you an introduction to what we do.
Starting and running a company is hard. From the moment you spend money, generate revenue, or incorporate, you'll face legal, financial, and equity management hurdles left and right. Overcoming these challenges means making the right decisions every step of the way. And that can get expensive fast. With Gus Launch, starting and managing your company is easy, cost-effective, and quick. We incorporate your company the right way for investment and growth, and provide a single platform to take care of challenges like issuing stock, opening a corporate bank account, and keeping your board up to date. You'll even get monthly time with a lawyer. Then, as your business grows and you need help with other problems, Gus Launch scales to solve them with add-on packages. When you need to keep financial records, we provide bookkeeping and accounting support, so tax time is a breeze, and you're always investor ready. Need to add team members or raise a round of investment? Soon, Gus Launch will have you covered there too, so that you never have to worry when you make revenue, hire employees, raise funds, or get acquired. Start up confidently with Gus Launch.
What do you guys think? Excellent, I like it. Does anyone here know anyone that needs to incorporate or is personally planning on incorporating? Got some hands up? Okay, well, inside these the envelopes I'm handing out, we have discounts built in, one of which actually does include a 30-minute coaching session with our CEO, David S. Rose, who is a serial entrepreneur and angel investor. So if anyone is interested, definitely, if you don't have an envelope, let me know. I'll be sitting in the back before you leave, and we'll get you hooked up. I'd love to turn it over to the panel. The first one was absolutely excellent, so I'm looking forward to this one as well. Thanks, guys.
And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Ellis, and he'll be taking over for the remainder. Thank you again for coming out.
Welcome. Great to have such a nice turnout, especially on a somewhat rainy day. I see a number of my clients and contacts in the audience too. Great that you all could make it. I mean, I have to say, part of the reason I started doing these events years ago was I knew that my clients, there's a lot that people need to learn to understand the legal issues for early stage companies and investing, and this was a good way to learn a lot fast. So it's everything we can tell you about financing in early stage financing in 90 minutes. You get it from 3 lawyers, an investor, an accountant, and it only costs you $15. That's definitely the cheapest legal advice you're ever going to get. So anyway, Andy has told you a little bit about the series. I think it's really a great series, the Foundations of Entrepreneurship series. It's going to be a dozen events. First one was organizing entities, choosing between an LLC or a C Corp, jurisdiction, how do you structure it, issue equity. There is a video for that, which is available on YouTube. It will also be available on my firm website soon. This next one is financing strategies. There are going to be 2 more legal events in the series. One will be intellectual property protection for early stage companies. We'll have a trademark lawyer, a patent lawyer, someone on licensing, and really talk through all the issues that come up in IP protection. And the last one is on the legal side is going to be long-range planning to get your company ready for an exit. And that's, as we know, sometimes things move so quickly these days. You may have just started your company, and there may already be potential acquirers. And so the things that you should be thinking about 1 year out, 18 months out, so that when you get that term sheet, when that potential buyer comes along, you're ready for them. And really, again, the way things move so quickly, at the early stages of a company's life, you should be thinking about having your house in order to get ready for an exit. So anyway, that'll be segment, I'm told to speak louder. That will be segment 4. Yeah. Andy, throw a shoe at me or something if I don't keep talking loud enough. Okay, so I told you about the series. For those who are interested in this topic generally, there are a bunch of videos that we've done from the past on legal issues for early stage companies. Again, you can get to them on my firm website. We do keep a mailing list for these events. If you would like to be on that mailing list, leave a business card with me or leave it with Doug or with Andy on your way out. That way we will make sure you get on the mailing list. Similarly, I think we have a pretty good PowerPoint this evening, and actually there are slides that we're not even going to get through tonight, but they are included. If you would like to get a copy of tonight's PowerPoint, same thing, leave a business card, and we'll make sure that you get it by email. With that, we'll quickly go through introductions. Again, my name is Paul Ellis. I am the principal of a 9-lawyer firm, the Paul Ellis Law Group. We're here in Midtown. We do a lot of work with early stage companies, formation, financing, IP protection, employment, equity comp, and exits, mergers and acquisitions. We work with small and mid-sized companies as well as individual and institutional investors, key employees and co-founders. Because of the amount of work we do in this space, beyond legal services, we can often make introductions to other people that you need to know in the community, like service providers, accountants, recruiters, investors, and others who service the early stage community in New York. Everyone in the firm comes out of large firms, so we are able to offer large firm expertise with the personalized attention and more reasonable cost structure of a small firm. So that's me. We have a really great panel. I'm so excited about everyone we've pulled together. We have Kris Brown, Alan Wink, Randall Clark, and then joining us a little bit later will be Charlie O'Donnell. So I'll leave it to you guys to say a little bit about yourselves, your firms, and your practices.
Go first.
Hello. Hi, my name is Kris Brown. I like to start off by saying I'm not the rapper. I'm a corporate partner at Goodwin, which is a 1,000-lawyer firm, and we really focus on just two sectors, technology and life sciences, but we like to say that we cover the full life cycle for those companies from formation and startup all the way through potentially public M&A. I actually focus on pretty much all of those areas, although I do very little public M&A myself. And so on any given day, including just today, I was dealing with a Series A, really early stage round for a startup company. And then tomorrow, if all goes well, I'm going to be flipping and taking one of my clients, which I started a few years ago, public. So it's a real diverse practice, and we pride ourselves again on working with companies all the way through. I'm also a pretty active, personally, angel investor. I've been the first or second investor into about 35 companies. And Paul has, at times, been with me and sometimes on the other side of me. So we've worked together over the years quite a bit. And so that gives me kind of an interesting and perhaps unique perspective on working with young companies. So I'm delighted to be here, and hopefully this will be an enjoyable discussion.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Alan Wink. I run capital markets for EisnerAmper, so I want to welcome everybody to our New York headquarters. We actually have about 600 people in this building alone. As the person responsible for capital markets, I really get involved in two areas. One being capital formation, helping clients raise debt, equity, mezzanine capital, and the other is corporate finance, helping clients with mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, strategic alliances, joint ventures, etc. So welcome.
Hey everyone, I'm Randall Clark. I'm an attorney at Gunderson, Dettmer. We are a law firm that represents venture capital funds and startup companies exclusively. So pretty much from early stage seed and Series A companies, seed and Series A investors, on up through late stage growth investors and unicorns and public companies as well. Pretty sector agnostic, so we have healthcare, consumer companies, you name it. If it's our only kind of mandate is that the companies we represent be venture backed and that the investors we represent be venture capitalists. And so among that, we kind of get to see it all.
All right, thank you all. Again, we have a great panel, so we're just going to jump right in. We have a lot of material that we're going to try to get through today. We're not going to be able to give you all the answers, but we're at least going to make sure you understand the questions and you have some ways of thinking about it. It's a big topic. There are a lot of different pieces of it. So the idea is just sort of a broad sort of survey through the issues that come up in early stage financing. I should again add that in addition to the slides that we're going to talk about, there are maybe a dozen slides on related and important topics that we knew we couldn't get through in 90 minutes. So they are at the back of the deck. And if you get it from us by email, you will get all those extra credit slides with other useful information. I will, and just in the nick of time, just before we jump into our content, is our last panelist. Now that is an entry.
Nobody told me the chair had wheels. That would have been great if the chair didn't have wheels.
All right, and to round out our panel, Charlie O'Donnell of Brooklyn Bridge Ventures.
I had to come all the way from Brooklyn for here. That's why I was.
All the way from Brooklyn, yes, it's getting closer all the time. Charlie, we've all given a little introduction to ourselves, please.
Sure.
It's a little hard.
Oh, okay. Hi. Great. So, super early stage investor, often first check. I lead seed and pre-seed rounds and do it in a really wide variety of different types of companies. So everything from, using AI and computer vision to analyze orthopedic x-rays to Ample Hills ice cream. So that's about as wide a spread as you can get in one portfolio, and I'm a solo general partner too, so I never have to go back and check with my partners on something.
All right, very good, Charlie. Thank you thank you for coming. Nice to have you. Okay, so we're just a little bit about logistics. For many of the slides, I'm just going to run through the first time, knock out the content of the slide, and then I will turn it over to my co-panelists here to add comments, perspectives, war stories, Q&A, what have you. With respect to Q&A, we do want to make this an interactive session, so we encourage people to ask questions as we go. But I will warn you that we have a lot of material, so at points I will have to say, well, that's enough questions, we got to go to the next slide. So I apologize in advance if I have to cut anybody off, but we will all be hanging around afterwards so we can answer some more questions. With that, Alan, I turn it over to you for the first slide.
Sure. Paul asked you to just give a little backdrop on what's going on in the venture capital world today, and it's probably like a good news, bad news story for people in this room, in that last year was an unbelievable year for venture capital investment. Over $130 billion across almost 9,000 deals. The problem was that about 60% of those dollars were for deals of $50 million or more. So you can probably interpret that by saying, it's great for the companies raising larger rounds, not so good for the companies raising smaller rounds. The good news is there's still an awful lot of capital out there, and it certainly didn't stop in the first quarter of this year. About $32.6 billion was invested in the first quarter of 2019, which was like the second largest quarter in the last decade. So it continues to be a really frothy market, great opportunities. Valuations are certainly continuing to creep up. It's a good time to be out there raising capital.
With valuations so high, is it a good time to be a venture capitalist?
The valuation thing is, I think, a little overblown, because I really think it depends on the stage, right? The less you have, the less there's variability in valuations, right? And so if you are raising money for a PowerPoint, a prototype, something without a lot of traction, whatever, there's frankly not going to be a ton for investors to bank on to overvalue something. I think we saw a lot of valuation growth in the later stages where companies, everyone already knew that Airbnb was on its way to being a public company. And much larger asset managers would sort of go in and look at these companies and say, yeah, I might want to pile into one of these rounds. That's when you get sort of the frothiness in valuations. At the stage that I'm doing stuff, I'm still seeing low to mid single digit valuations, maybe higher single digit valuations on companies that have some pretty decent revenue traction. And I also think that New York is very different than in the Valley too around valuations, is that it's harder to get momentum in New York, not because there are less investors. There are just as many investors. There's plenty of money in New York. They aren't as connected to each other. I think what happens in the Valley is that you get 3 of the top angels and the next 16 all know who those people are and they want to pile on. In New York, you get 3 different angels that aren't connected to each other. One's a real estate person, one's a hedge fund person, and now you have to get 10 more, and there's no signaling, and I think that holds down valuations a bit.
I certainly agree with what Charlie's saying. I actually sit on 2 angel group boards, one in New Jersey, one in Philadelphia. And I think over the last 5 years, there's probably been less than a handful of deals where the valuation for seed stage dollars was in excess of $4 or $5 million, to be quite honest with you.
And that's something that we're not aligned, right? We are trying to pay as little for your company as possible, and you are trying to sell as little of it as possible, right? And so we'll meet somewhere in the middle, but there's just sort of a reality to that, and I think that what entrepreneurs should just think about is like, how can I create a better market for my shares, right? The only way you're going to be able to drive up your valuation is by trying to accomplish a little more before you raise. Sometimes it's a function of volume of pitches, right? Where, I think what happens a lot of times is you go out, you pitch a handful, a couple of people, you see whether they like it or not. If not enough of them do, then you go out again, and you have this like really long, protracted kind of raise, and it's just really tough to get momentum. If you're raising, that is going to be your full-time job. Make sure you go out to enough people, and enough people where if a critical mass of them say yes, you've actually got a round, and you may be oversubscribed to that round. And I see people not reaching out to enough people because the reality of the stats, I don't know, some of these angel groups, how many deals you might see in a year, but for me, 2,000 things come across my desk in a year. I take about 150 pitch meetings, and I do 10 in a year, right? So you go out and pitch 3 people, just even if you're a good pitch, like the chances that you're going to close on those is just very low. So you got to make sure you go out to enough people at a time.
All right, so before we dig in deeper on VC and angel financing, let's talk a minute about the alternatives. Now, these can be complete alternatives to financing, or they can be something to get you along the way. As Charlie said, if you can make a little more progress before you go out for your money, you will end up likely with a better valuation. So many of these are self-evident. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'd like to call out a couple of them. Towards the bottom, maximizing benefit of government tax incentives. I mention that because I often have clients that come in and haven't really been paying attention to the tax incentives that are out there. That often comes from working with an accountant who is not really savvy to what's out there. So I always call that one out in particular in these sorts of sessions. Make sure if there are R&D credits or any other type of government tax incentives, you're working with an accountant who understands them and you're taking advantage of them, because they can add up to real money. And sometimes you can get some of them retroactively, but some of them, if you don't do it timely, you've lost them. Another one I like to call out is third from the bottom, customer advances and prepayments. This is another thing that I say to my clients when they're trying to figure out their financing strategy. Focus on customers that are incentivized for your success. They want what you're making. That works especially in a B2B play. And some of them may be prepared to prepay in order to help you along the way and get that product out there that they need. So those are just 2 of a number of different types of bootstrapping strategies that can sometimes be an alternative. More often they're going to be something that helps you get as far as you can before you actually have to take in that money. Anything to add to this?
The one thing I would say is, particularly, most of your spend is going to be hiring, right? And I think a lot of people fear that if they don't have a lot of money to put towards hiring, that they won't be able to hire a team, but they don't actually go out and try. And I think the reality is, if you're just transparent and you say, listen, here's my idea, here's why I think it's going to work, you find the right person to work on this, either on a consulting basis or full-time or whatever, and you just say, look, we're aiming to get this much done until we raise. Will you join up for this? Part of what I look at as an investor is like, can you hire the people that you really have no business hiring? Because that's what you're going to have to do at a startup. You're not going to be able to pay more than a bank or a hedge fund or Google or Facebook or whatever. So being able to bring on some of those early people for not a lot of capital, because you don't have a lot of capital, or getting more work out of them than they promised, and they said, hey, maybe I'll give you 10 hours a week or whatever, and it turns out they're doing 30 because they just get sucked into it. Those are good signals that that investors look for, and it's also helpful if you're trying to bootstrap it.
I think the one thing to keep in mind is do whatever you can to validate your product. I mean, investors love to see validation, and that's a really important fact.
All right, so after we've gotten past bootstrapping, again, before we get to VCs and angels, you should think about other sources of equity or debt financing, and I've listed them here. Friends and family, that's often where you start, or investments by co-founders. Customer financing and supplier and vendor financing, that's another twist on what I just said. I was talking about customer prepayments, but in the same ways your customers are interested in your success, suppliers and vendors may also be interested in your success, and sometimes customers, suppliers, vendors may be willing to invest in your company as a strategic investment. And again, that can be something that can be very beneficial in the beginning. It can be an investment on better terms than a strictly financial investor. And you may be able to get it early and it can help you to get started. That sort of shades into strategic partnerships and alliances. Small business loans, there can be debt opportunities available to smaller companies. They're difficult, but you can work it out. And then equity crowdfunding. It's perhaps not quite as hot now as it was 2 or 3 years ago, but I certainly have clients that have successfully used equity crowdfunding. What I'd say generally about these alternative strategies, although there are a lot of benefits because it postpones the day when you have to bring in VC or angel money, they come at a cost. You may miss a market opportunity because you're just moving slower because you didn't have that injection of $3 to $5 million from a VC. There are certain types of businesses that really require significant investment that you're not going to get through these alternatives. If you're always short on cash, that may prevent you from really moving forward, from thriving. You're just going to figure out how you can make it paycheck to paycheck. And ultimately, companies will fail because they didn't bring in the money they needed when they needed it, tried to get by on bootstrapping, and just ran out of cash. So, although there are benefits, one needs to be cognizant of the costs.
One thing that I'd also throw in there too is if you only have a limited budget to get something either off the ground or like showable to an investor, be very, very careful what you wind up spending that money on and whether the thing that you spend money on is the thing that makes the biggest difference in the pitch. And what I mean by this is, let's say you come up with some kind of, like luxury goods site, e-commerce site, right? And the really tough thing in your space is nailing the brand. The brand has to look amazingly good for your like high-end clientele to really care about this thing, right? So you could do two things, right? You could, maybe hire a developer to put together a basic, Shopify site to sell your stuff to get like revenue $1, or you can hire a designer to build a clickable wireframe that doesn't actually really work, but really shows like your insight into the brand. Like there's a case to be made to say, well, you might actually be better off not launching a thing that actually works yet, because that doesn't prove anything. Like who can't get a Shopify site up and going? Like that's easy to do. But like nailing a brand, if that's the hard thing, like maybe that's the work you should do ahead of time. So I see a lot of founders spending their initial bootstrap dollars on things that it's not clear really mattered, and I'll go back and be like, okay, but you could have pitched this to me before you spent $50,000 on an app or $100,000 on an app, because now you've spent $100,000 and have no traction. So like you might have been better off not spending that and just showing me what the app would look like if you built it, because now your story is even worse.
All right, so who are we talking about when we're talking about early stage investment? Basically angels and VCs. And we're going to spend a couple of slides here talking about angels, who they are, how they invest, and why. Same thing with VCs. So angel investors in particular, when we talk about angels, that's a term that can cover a lot of ground. In a sense, that angel investors vary among them more than VC investors. So angels, they can be experienced investors or not. I mean, angel investors can be people who've done, many rounds of investment, or they can be, simply the proverbial doctors and dentists, people that are interested in investing but don't really have sophisticated understanding. Usually individuals, but it could be a small fund, a family office. Angels are, not, again, they differ more than VCs. It can be a disciplined network, like New Jersey Angels, Alan mentioned, or New York Angels, or it can be individuals or loose affiliation. Generally, their investments are going to be smaller than VCs, although increasingly there are VCs that will make quite small investments. They may or may not have industry expertise. You can have angels that have a deep understanding of your industry and others that know nothing about your industry. And lastly and importantly, their motivations can vary significantly. Whereas VCs generally, they are in it to make money for themselves and their investors. Look, they love the space, they love what they're doing, but at the end of the day, they've got a fund, they have investors, they have to make money. Angels, generally they want to make money as well, but some of them are just doing it for love. They're doing it because it's something they really enjoy doing. They're doing it for a pastime. They don't have to invest that money, and that's something that's significant for you because that can result in less discipline. So strengths of angels, they can offer significant funding, reasonable terms, and often earlier than VCs, as well as useful guidance and contacts. They can be less demanding in terms of when they demand an exit, but they will generally not be a source of further funding. They can be overreaching in terms of their investment terms. The investment process can be uncertain and slow, and once you have them on board, investor relations can be very time-consuming. I've had companies, they brought in 50, 75 angel investors, and they were spending all their time just answering questions from angels. So take that seriously.
Yeah, I'm dealing with that right now. And I came here with my colleague Sonia, who's in the office, and I was on a 45-minute call explaining to an angel investor, the company that I'm representing is raising their Series A now. But I spent 45 minutes explaining to him how the model worked, walking him through the calculations from how we had converted his safe. He hadn't read any of the financing documents. He said, let's do another call to discuss these. It can be a very, very slow process if you have a long tail of angel investors who don't do this frequently. And so, that's a deal, that's a Series A that's probably going to take 2 months to close, mainly because of having to individually educate and negotiate with angel investors. And the company signed a term sheet for a Series A last week. We might close it next Friday because it's all VCs. And so keep that in mind.
But there are some benefits in dealing with an angel group. And Charlie mentioned before, going out and knocking on doors. Well, you can knock on one angel group door and talk to 40 different angel investors who are each going to invest in your company individually. So it saves an awful lot of time. The other part about it is the due diligence that an angel group will do will be much less than a VC would do.
Yeah.
So you actually can close around in 60 to 90 days?
I don't know about that. You get 40 people asking questions.
Yeah, but one sort of leading the group.
Well, I think there's two different groups of VCs too, right? There's like, technically I am a VC, but I'm just the one person, one fund, and like, I guarantee you, New York Angels is asking way more questions than I will ask in one meeting. But, you know, a later stage VC that you're trying to pull and make them do something earlier might have a different layer of due diligence, obviously.
A couple things. I want to say with angels, first of all, finding them is tough, notwithstanding there being these angel organizations. If you are looking to find angels, go to your lawyer, go to your accountant. That's the first step. Everyone has a rich uncle or aunt, but that's just one person, and frankly, they're only good for one check, and then you're embarrassed having to ask them for more. So you really need to find the kind of quasi-professional angel. The second is the angels. Many angels are not that sophisticated, and so sometimes you've got this dream of a company, and they will give you the check for $50,000, $100,000 if you're lucky, and they might agree to a valuation of $100 million because they really have no idea what they're talking about, and that is a terrible thing, even though it sounds like a great thing to you, right? Because you're going to then disappoint them when the next round comes in, and they're giving what is the more realistic valuation of between $1 to $4 million for a startup, because they're going to own a lot less of the company than they thought they did, and they're going to be watered down. So those are things. Those are some things to bear in mind. And the one other thing is that, frankly, I think everyone's an angel. And I had $200,000 worth of debt coming out of college and law school. I had no business being an angel investor. Absolutely zero business doing it. But I was really interested in that world, and I found or scraped or frankly shouldn't have spent $10,000 on my first angel investment. I didn't do that well on that investment. I think I barely got my money back after like 8 years, so that's not a good angel investment. But it was an invaluable experience. I was a lawyer. I was suddenly understanding from a firsthand direct experience, perspective like what all these documents meant. I was in the room with angel investors, a lot older and more experienced than me, and they looked at me as if I was an angel instead of just a lawyer. It kind of built my legal career, to be quite honest. And I think you can build your careers just by dabbling in it to some degree yourselves, because everyone has a little business. If you're interested in it, put a little money, because if it's a friend, you can really learn a lot from that, and you can then leverage it in a way I feel I did to build a nice legal career, to build a network for your company. So just wanted to throw out those ideas.
One thing that I would say that is a benefit of an angel group is once you actually get everybody on board, and I think this is something that founders don't spend enough time thinking about, is like, what do you want from the people who put in the money besides the money, right? And so you may be able to pick up, 5, 10, 15 folks around the table, all of whom come with their own networks, their own experience. Like, you may be able to go into that group of 40 and say, oh, hey, this is a real estate tech deal. Who here has connections into any of the top real estate firms? And, in a place like New York, you pitch a room of 40 high net worth individuals, you're going to find a bunch of people who have those connections and that you can leverage those connections for. So, it may be compelling to, get all the money from like one VC firm, but, if that investor isn't really as tapped into the networks that you need as much as possible, or if maybe you wind up getting somebody junior because it's a small investment from that firm or whatever, it could be more beneficial to have a group of folks around the table who are angels who have like specific roles of like, okay, you're going to help me with marketing, you're going to help me with sales or all that.
So just one last word on angels. Yeah, question?
So the question for people who couldn't hear that is, when you're entering into your first relationship with an angel investment and documenting their investment, do you pre-agree to some type of exit, meaning liquidity or a way in which they'll make some money off that investment in advance, and do you guarantee or try to promise them terms? And the answer is a resounding no. And if there's an angel that is demanding that, then that's very dangerous, and you should go search a little further. I actually think, and I, as an angel myself, I have to fully expect to lose the money that I'm making an angel investment. In other words, I have no business making an investment if I expect or I'm relying upon that money for some type of return. Angels are just that. They're there for the upside potential on the investment. They're very early money. They have the benefit of getting in a very early valuation if they do things like a safe and a convertible note, which we'll speak to. They may get a further discount, and they should get some joy out of doing it. It should not be their business, and that, I mean, you guys may disagree, but you cannot promise them anything, because you can't even promise Charlie as your Series A investor that he's going to get anything, because trust me, it all changes when the B, C, and D money comes along, and then when the IPO comes along, it's changed again.
Yeah, no, yeah.
All right, just to wrap up on angels. Again, many of my clients get their early investment from angels, and it's a great thing. So although we said something about the downsides of angels, there are a lot of plus sides of working with angels. I think the takeaway is that with angels, you need to be a little more careful who you're talking to. Make sure they're serious, they don't waste your time, that they're disciplined, and that they understand there's reasonable expectations on the back end. I mean, their terms are reasonable and their expectations are reasonable. Otherwise, it can end up being, as Randall mentioned, consuming a lot of your time to manage them.
One comment I will make, though, is while these are two different groups, I would be very careful not to equate them with two different rounds. Because oftentimes, VCs are coming into the same round with a bunch of angels or an angel group, and you could sort of mix the two. So it's not as if like, oh, now I do my angel round with just angel investors, and then once I do that, then I'm trying to go for VC. The first check might come from a VC. The first check might come from an angel. The only technical determination between the two of them is like an angel is investing their own money. A VC operating out of a fund is investing on other people's behalf. Generally, VCs are later stage and angels participate earlier, but we see lots of instances where like celebrities do later rounds of companies that we all know, right? Celebrities will pile into like the series C, D, or E of Casper and what have you. Technically, those are angel investors because it's their own money. But we don't think of those as like angel rounds because the company's all established. So, there can be mixing and matching in the same round.
All right, which is a good. Yeah.
So, a quick question.
Statistically, most companies don't raise, right? Just if you think of all the people who have tried, only a few, a handful have actually successfully raised. And of those, most of them close who they can close as long as they're reasonable people and not bad people and all that sort of stuff. And a tiny handful of those are way oversubscribed and pick and choose.
Yeah, I've had companies where they thought they were going to raise at this number, they got one term sheet. At this number, that's what the company's worth. And then conversely, if you get 3 term sheets, you might have thought the company was worth this, but you get Charlie and others competing with each other, and now the company's worth this, and we're raising at a much, like I literally had one company where the founder negotiated his own term sheet, which you should not do. Have your lawyer look at it. But one thing that he did very, very well was he didn't include a no shop in the term sheet. And so he signed a term sheet, kept taking in additional offers. The other investor got wind of it, and he increased the valuation by $20 million, I think.
After signing?
After signing the term sheet with the same investor, because he didn't have a no shop and he was free to go out and shop for other better offers. So,
All right, great. This is all great stuff. We're probably going to have to move a little bit faster. That's the problem with being the guy standing at the podium, because you have to keep everything moving. All right, so let's talk about VCs for a moment. As Charlie noted, the distinguishing factor is that VCs are investing third-party funds, which they've raised through a fund or series of funds. So what is a VC fund? It's a pooled investment vehicle. It's raising from institutional investors. It is professionally managed. The managers are compensated, so they're, again, it's not angels investing their own money, although managers usually have some skin in the game, but they get compensated on a 2 and 20 formula, generally. They're investing in many portfolio companies. An important distinguishing factor is that a fund usually has a term, often 10 years. That's a period of time in which the fund has to deploy and deploy its capital, liquidate its investments, and distribute back to investors. So that, unlike angels who may not have so much timing pressure, VCs often do have some pressure in terms of reaching an exit. And lastly, funds, perhaps not Charlie, but funds often have a particular focus with respect to industry sector, investment size, and financing stage. Okay, so benefits of VC financing. It can come in large amounts, so it's a fast way to ramp up. It allows management to stay focused on building the business instead of fundraising. The right VC can give your company credibility. And that's something to really focus on. I mean, we haven't said much about that yet. But the investors are bringing you more than money, generally speaking. They're bringing you credibility. They're bringing you contacts. And they can really help get you to the next level with, and that's actually the next bullet. So VCs can add significant value, strategic industry and business advice, disciplined focus, contacts, additional funding. Angels are perhaps less likely to be a source of follow-on funding than VCs, and they can also help you with your exit opportunities.
Yeah, I would say generally, in my career, what I've experienced is that I've done better when I work with people in situations where the relationship that I have with them is the thing they do all the time. So forget about just funding, just like in general, if you work with people and your working relationship is their main focus, you're probably going to have a better experience. So you're more likely, for example, on the angel side, to have a better experience with people who are full-time angels, who are out in the market, who know, the market terms, who all they do is sort of work with their companies, have more experience. The same is true for VCs, who for the most part are full-time at what they're doing. Not always the case. There are folks like Ben Lehrer is a partner at Lehrer Ventures and also runs a company, right? So it gives him a very particular operational insight into what it's like to run a company, but maybe has some time constraints, right? And they have a larger team, so you might work with multiple sort of people there. But I think the important thing to realize here is that for the most part, if you're dealing with someone who runs a fund, there's a certain credibility factor that you can count on too, right? That here's someone who other people have trusted to manage their money for them. So usually you're dealing with sort of, at least someone that's been blessed by the market in some way.
All right, so for all the benefits of VC financing, it is important when you go into it to understand what the disadvantages are, because it's a choice that you make for your company and for your future, and you need to know what the constraints are that come with it. So it does result in dilution. Many VCs will not invest in small or early rounds, although that's less true today than it was, say, 5-7 years ago. Something we mentioned before, the fund structure generally demands that the VCs focus on an exit within a certain amount of time. If you are not planning on selling your company, you want to be running it 10, 15, 20 years from now, then you need to think carefully about taking VC money. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to continue running your company, but the necessity or the strong desire for an exit on the part of VCs is going to impose a certain discipline in terms of the timeline and the potential exit. There will be shared control. A VC is going to look for likely a board seat. They're going to have veto and consent rights. There is always the risk that you may lose control of your company, or as a CEO, you could get replaced somewhere along the way. I mean, these are all things that can happen to you as a founder once you bring in institutional money. The fund structure limits your ability to do things other than make money, like pure science. VC financing can be time-consuming to find, negotiate, and close, although that's the same with angel. And the transaction costs can be significant. So bottom line, VC financing can be very valuable. For some companies, it's the only way, but it comes at a cost, and you need to make sure interests and objectives are aligned.
Yeah, sure. I'll answer that and I'll make a comment in additionally. Yeah, sure. The comment was like, specifically when we're talking about dilution, how much of your company are you going to sell, right? And I think, at the end of the day, if you're going to go out and raise, you want to raise as much money as possible to get you to a meaningful next step. And where the market has kind of settled is that, generally speaking, somewhere between, call it 15 and 25 to 30% of a company is sold at any given stage. Now, there's lots of variability within that. But if you hear, for example, that somebody raised $2 million, the valuation is probably going to be somewhere between 5 or 6 and 12-ish or something like that, like in that kind of range. It could be all over the board, but I think what's key to understand, I had to explain this to one of my portfolio companies the other day, is that they were going out, they were like thinking about what the right amount of money to raise in the next round was. And they kept thinking like, $3 million is all we need. But they made a lot of progress, so they were hoping for a valuation in the 20s, meaning they were hoping to sell only 10% of their company for the $3 million, or maybe not much more than that. And while that may be a fair valuation for their progress, there really aren't investors who invest $3 million that only expect to get 10% of a company for that dollar round. So the problem is that the group of people who invest in certain amounts are looking to get 20% or 15% at a time as a lead investor. So in some way, how much you ask for, the percent of your company you sell actually doesn't change that much. The ask can affect people's perception of where your valuation is, right? So if you're saying, yeah, I really only need 500K, you're not going to sell just 5% of your business for 500K, even if that's, because the people who write 500K checks expect to pay less because they're going into higher risk deals. Their whole thing is, let me give you a little hard to get money, and I'll get a nice chunk of the company, but maybe I'm one of the only people willing to take that risk. So the percentage doesn't change that often.
Charlie, most people walk into your office telling you what they think the valuation is?
No. That's a really good point. Is that most people don't have a particular valuation ask. Some do. Some say, hey, we're trying to raise $2 million on 6, and if you don't have a lead, I'll be like, okay, that's your ask. That may not be my bid. But for rounds that you're trying to cobble together a bunch of angels, there's a perception that you need a lead to raise a round, and that's just not true. If you have 20 people you're trying to raise money from, and you say, hey, look, the market for this valuation is X, And everybody's like, yeah, that sounds fair. Like, you really don't necessarily, you want to have standardized terms, you want to work with a lawyer who's done this before, but if you're providing a fair valuation to people, you don't necessarily need to sort of individually negotiate with everyone. But yeah, most people say, I'm trying to raise this, and then they let the market determine what the right valuation is. But you hone in on the number first as opposed to the valuation.
All right, so next slide. What do VCs look for? Charlie, this is for you.
Oh, and actually the comment I wanted to make about this slide too, there's a difference between who you choose to take money from at first, and then whether you choose to continue that kind of financing forever. And I think that's an important distinction. And for example, we're seeing a lot of that in the consumer products area. Companies like Brooklyn, which is a New York company, raised a little seed round, raised an A, and then that was it. They never did the B, never did the C. They're now doing $100 million in revenue, only having raised the one institutional round, which, by the way, is pretty good for everybody. I mean, maybe that institutional player wanted
the VCs.
Well, it depends. Actually, it depends on the size of the fund.
VCs that didn't get into the round.
Oh, not the VCs that didn't get into the round, right? But like some people want to write big checks, so maybe it's disappointing. But you sell a business for a couple $100 million, only having taken one round of financing, like that's a pretty good deal. So when we talk about stuff like shared control, dilution, if you raise one round, you're probably not going to lose control of the company. It's when you raise multiple rounds and each round comes with a board member that then you start getting into like possibly losing control. So I think as you think about raising, you really have to think about like, okay, I might want a VC or a certain set of professionals, but like, do I really want to go down the every 18 months, raise another round, add another board member, like, and ultimately, like, you can be somewhat in control of your spend and how you want to raise. And when I talk to people about like dilution, forget about like what price. It's very easy for me to say, like, forget about the price, don't worry about it, right? But like, if you're really worried about dilution, raise less rounds of financing. That's where you get killed on dilution. Taking another 20 and another 20 and another 20 versus nickel and diming on price in one round makes a big, big difference.
I'll just say one thing about that. Because you are at a stage where sometimes you have to take the money, and a common thing I tell my clients is obviously it's better to own 1% of a $1 billion company than 90% of a $100 company. So the valuation is, at least from the legal standpoint, sometimes less important than the founders think it is, because the common perception obviously is, it's like a democracy and majority rules with these companies. And so you have to really control them, own more than 50%. But the truth is, and we can get into this a little later, contractually, all the state laws permit one to have stockholder agreements. And so the key document as a founder here is to have an arrangement with the people who come into your company whereby control contractually remains with the group who you want to continue to control the company. There are more sophisticated ways, multiple voting tiers, etc. But that's the key thing that I have so many clients that just don't realize that's the case. They get really hung up on the valuation. And I say, look, don't get the money. If you need it, we'll handle the control contractually.
Ownership is not control.
Ownership is not control. Exactly.
So, okay, so what do VCs look for? So keep moving forward. So there's a certain market size, right? That, like, obviously, getting 100% market penetration on a $200,000 market just doesn't go very far, right? So, billion-dollar markets, you've probably heard this sort of before. I think founder product or founder company fit is really, really important. A lot of times I ask people like, well, why are you the right person to run this particular business? Because chances are you're not the only person who's thought of this idea, but the ability of you to beat out your competition has more to do with like your unique insight, right? I was just literally I had a founder come with me on the train up here because he wanted some extra time, and so I was telling him about like LinkedIn. LinkedIn's feature set is not what differentiated it from other professional networks to start out. The fact that Reid Hoffman was the founder of LinkedIn and comes from the kind of PayPal mafia of very insider Silicon Valley folks where like 50 of his best friends were VCs. Like if you were an entrepreneur and somebody invited you to a social network where most of the people on there are VCs, like you're accepting that invite, right? So there was like, he was the right person to be running that particular startup. Whereas like, a bunch of college kids could have developed the site, but wouldn't have been as skilled in executing that because like the college kids don't know anybody useful. So like, why would anybody join that professional social network that was like built by a bunch of college kids? And I think the other thing I would say in terms of the story and pitch that we look for is, and I've said this a bunch of times before, fundraising is a ticket to the future, not a reward for the past. Many times I have founders come in and say, look at all I did when I bootstrapped. Look at what we've done up to this point. It doesn't tell me what you're going to do, right? And I'm signing up to be an investor and shareholder in this company for the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Where's this thing going? Your best guess. Right? Yes, the model is not going to be what it winds up being, however many years from now, but there's no one who has a better guess than you do as to where this company is going. And oh, by the way, it's your plan. And you're the most informed person about executing for a plan. So I want to know what your plan is. I want to hear that it's well thought out. I want to hear that it's workable. I want to know how you got there on this and what we're doing going forward. And I think that's something that a lot of people sort of come in and say, great, with no marketing we did X, when I'd much rather hear, if I had marketing dollars, here's where I would spend them, because that's a much more productive conversation.
Next slide is for you to,
Okay.
although we kind of,
yeah, evaluations is much more art than science, and not something to get hung up about. Like, I always tell people, like, get people interested first, then work out the legal terms, the right valuation, and all that sort of stuff. There's no point to, getting wrapped up around all of this stuff unless you have a bunch of people wanting to hand you money. Everything else is details, and as long as you're dealing with professionals, both on your side of your legal team and what have you, and professional investors, like, very rarely are you going to screw up the whole round by, one term here or there, or using a convertible versus a safe, or all that sort of stuff. I know it feels like a lot of information, but it's like, if you have $1 million worth of people who want to put in money, that's a solvable problem that, professional lawyers and all that sort of stuff can, help you get there on. But, that's the hard part. Don't get crazy about all of the stuff beforehand. Yeah, and I think the other thing would just be, be very careful, sort of like what I was saying to the gentleman before, of, what your raise is signaling. And, oh, by the way, I see a lot of differences. So I have a pretty diverse portfolio of founders. So something like 40% of the founders that I've backed are have at least one female on the team. There's another sort of 10% of other types of diversity, like 3 African American founders, and what I've seen really across, just anecdotally, is that a lot of the female founders and founders of color under-ask. They ask for what they believe the market will give to them. And look, if you open up any, you click around the web, and there's a lot of really daunting statistics about who gets funding. So it's not surprising that somebody comes in and goes, shit, I'm trying to get $1 million, but I just, look at who gets the funding. That's probably not in the cards for somebody like me, so I'll only ask for 500. And that's not the way to go. It plays into, I think, stereotypes of around ambition. somebody will see through and say, well, that's just not the right amount of money for this company. So like, you probably don't know what you're doing. Ask for what you need. Ask for it confidently. Ask for it confidently because you've done your homework, that that's actually the amount you need. And don't worry too much about, you know, where the money goes to, you know, because like ultimately each funding round is its own little marketplace. And just because, you know, some other founder didn't get, or this founder did get, or whatever, like, I wouldn't worry as much about that. I'm the largest seed investor in the Wing, which raised $2 million on a PowerPoint, right? And if anybody's ever met Audrey Gelman, she's one of the most confident people you ever met. And she walked in and said, I'm raising $2 million on 6. You're either in or you're out, and like didn't, you know, like I'm fully aware that she knew the percentages of like who gets financing, who doesn't get as much dollars or whatever, and like that did not stop her from asking for what she needed in that round, and ultimately, you know, closed it. So I think that's important consideration too.
One thing that I would add on valuation is don't prioritize valuation over getting the right people on your cap table. And two examples. One is, you know, like you're gonna be not stuck, but like you're gonna be stuck with these investors for the duration of your company. You know, they don't have, you know, you have no right. I get this a lot of times with founders. How do I buy this person out? You make them an offer and get them to agree. That's it. Like, you know, it happens even before equity rounds. It happens with safes. It's like, oh my God, why did I take this person's money? And I've had founders buy people out for 2x just to get them off the cap table. You know, you deal with that. I would take money at a lower valuation for someone who's going to be supportive when you need them to be, like during your Series A, than taking it at a higher valuation and thinking that they are like Warren Buffett or something and they just need to have everything catered to. The other thing that I would say is in terms of not prioritizing valuation is that sometimes I was having lunch with someone, his company had raised from Sequoia, and he was like, as soon as that deal got announced, tons of inbound interest from VCs. He's like, we weren't raising any more money, but because we had gotten Sequoia to lead our Series A, VCs basically said, if you will raise a preemptive Series B, we'll give you this valuation like months after they had raised. And so sometimes, you know, if you have the luxury of getting that tier 1 kind of VC on your cap table, it can really set you up to raise at a much higher valuation, and you know the dilutive impact of those subsequent rounds will be as significant.
Sequoia or Brooklyn Bridge Venture.
Sequoia or raising money from Charlie or Kris.
Yeah, I know we need to go on, but because some people really might be at the very beginning here, and this valuation point is important. And from a legal perspective, I just want to point out, you know, some people come to me and I got an angel who wants to, you know, give me $50,000 at $100 million valuation, and another one wants to give me $100,000 at a $10 million valuation. Can I do that? You know, no. Okay. So you can't be offering securities at the same time to different people at different valuations. So just a basic thing to point out. You have to kind of. There's a question in the back, maybe based related to this. I just can't hear it.
You gotta speak up.
Typically not, though sometimes you do, and again, if that's your only option, you do it. We have something that we've been, you know, invented the last decade, Series seed rounds they're called, in which case you kind of take what was traditionally a seed round and you tack onto it preferences and give people those types of rights, and that's somewhat common, but more typically you try not to have that at the very beginning stages of a company.
All right, so now we're going to, so you've figured out angel, VC, you found them. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how a round gets put together. So we're going to spend the next few slides on the different types of securities that get used in early stage companies, early stage financings. So I'll just mention common stock is not generally used in early stage financings. If common stock is what the founders get, it's used for equity incentive plans, for stock option plans, but not generally in the types of financing that we are talking about this evening, the instrument that's going to be used in a financing. More likely, it's going to be a convertible note, a SAFE, or convertible preferred stock. We'll go on and talk about we'll talk about each of these a little bit further. The one thing I would point out is that for the rest of this, we're going to be talking mostly about in relation to a C corporation, but these types of instruments can also be used, or at least the principles can be used in an LLC as well, by and large. There's certainly differences here and there, but the overall principles are applicable to LLCs. So let's start with convertible notes. A convertible note is a debt, it is a loan, but it is a loan that is convertible into equity at a future point. It's usually set up so that in the next round of financing, which presumably a preferred round, or I should say in the next preferred round of financing, the convertible note will convert into whatever equity is offered in that round. Generally, there is it has to be a round of a certain size. It usually converts at a discount to the next round pricing. So if you do a convertible note and then 6 months later you do an A round at $1 a share, if the convertible note had a 20% discount, the convertible note investors would convert in at 80 cents a share. So they get a benefit compared to the Series A investors. That's their benefit from having invested earlier when there was more risk in the company. These days, there is generally a cap on valuation. So regardless of what the valuation is in the next round, in the Series A round, there will be a cap as to the price at which the convertible note investors will convert. That's really for the protection of the investors. So suppose an investor comes in thinking, well, this company is probably worth around $5 million. I'm going to put in a convertible note, and then the example I guess Charlie gave, the company that grows and grows and grows and doesn't do a financing. Maybe finally they do a financing at a $20 million valuation or a $40 million valuation. Well, if that convertible note investor didn't have a cap, the company that they thought they were going to have somewhere around a 5 or 7 million valuation, all of a sudden they're converting at a 20 or 40 million valuation, and they'll still get their 20% discount, but they're not nearly getting the benefit of the bargain they thought they should get for investing early. So that's the concept of a cap. I think it's worth pointing out that one problem that convertible notes have is that they are susceptible to renegotiation. It certainly doesn't always happen, but it does sometimes happen that when the preferred investors come along, they'll say, well, we know you promised your convertible note investors your XYZ rights. We're willing to come in, but those rights that you offered them are too rich. And then that can result in a difficult conversation between you and your convertible note investors. They may not be obligated to renegotiate their rights, but if there's only one investor out there and the company needs the money, it may be a difficult situation all around. I certainly wouldn't say that happens on a regular basis, but it does happen. It's something you should be aware of. It's one of the reasons that sophisticated investors for larger rounds are going to prefer often to do a preferred round rather than a convertible note or a safe round. Moving down the slide, convertible notes faster and less expensive to negotiate and close than preferred. So it's a lot easier, faster, cheaper than preferred stock. Not as easy as a safe. A convertible note does pay interest. It may be secured, and it must be repaid ahead of equity. You guys want to chime in on?
I just want to say a few things. First, maybe you're wondering, like, why are we even talking about this? Because, you know, you're trying to raise money, so take in equity. So the two reasons you go with these first couple structures are that often the valuation discussion is tough, and you don't want to, like, do something wrong because you're taking in the first very small amount of money, a couple $100,000, $50,000, and that's not enough to, you don't want to kind of queer the market by doing that at some high valuation, like I mentioned, that your rich aunt or uncle wants to give you, and then not have anyone else be interested later. So this defers kind of the valuation discussion because you're just loaning the company. So that's an important reason you do this. Notwithstanding, you do put in that cap you talked about in the valuation. That can kind of hint at the parameters of the valuation. So you sort of, you can't get it to be perfect. The other thing is, it is quite complicated to agree upon all the terms of the equity at an early stage, and so it's not only cheaper, but it defers the discussion around what the terms will, you know, the complexity of the equity, because it can take all shapes and sizes. And finally, I would just say, there's a conception I get from founders who come to me, they say, well, you know, I'm just going to fund my own company with a convertible note, you know, and I'm going to own a bunch more of it beyond my founder shares when I get some investors, and then all my sweat equity that I'm putting in terms of from my own bank account will suddenly be more equity in the company. Well, that just will never, I mean, stop me if I'm wrong, guys, but that never flies. And if you're the founder, you know, whatever money you put in the company, that is the original equity you get. You don't get any more just because you loan the company money. So founders can't be convertible note lenders.
All right, so we actually pretty much did this next slide. We talked about terms. So let's go to a safe. So a safe, simple agreement for future equity, a relatively recent, 2013, maybe, 12, something. Y Combinator was sort of the sponsor and developed them, has popularized them. You can find the different safe forms at the Y Combinator website, along with other materials that help to explain them and so you understand how to use them. In some ways, a safe is similar to a convertible note. You know, it's convertible in the next equity round. It often will have a discount. It often will have a cap. But there are important differences. There's no interest. There's no maturity date. It may not have a qualified financing threshold. So convertible note usually converts only into a round of a certain size. Safes do not necessarily have that feature. Upon an acquisition, a safe will convert into common or it's repaid. Convertible notes have a variety of features. Again, as I noted, it can be with or without a cap. It can be with or without a discount. A lot of benefits to using a safe. It's standardized. You know, there's very, very little to negotiate. Legal fees are quite low. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for safes. And for something that's only been around for a few years, they have grown, you know, very quickly. I mean, the last time I did this presentation a few years ago, the safe was kind of a footnote. And now I'd say, you know, I rarely do convertible notes anymore. I mean, you know, mostly we do safes. One other thing I would note is that a safe is designed for a C Corp, so if you're using it for an LLC, it does need a little bit of modification, but that's relatively straightforward. I mean, it's a very useful instrument, and I think we're doing a lot of them.
I do like, so the new YC forms are the post-money versions of the safes, which I think is really helpful. In fact, before they released it, some of us at the firm had come up with our own kind of version of this post-money safe, which is really helpful for founders in understanding how much of the company they're giving up. So if you have $5 million in safes at a $25 million post-money valuation, you've given up 20% of your company. It's much like usually like with convertible notes. I feel like it's never quite right. Like people are just like, okay, if I'm raising on this note, I was like, well, it depends because how long is the note going to be outstanding? It's like the interest. Plus, I got to know how much of the option pool is in the pre-money. It's like, but like you can give them kind of a best case scenario with a note. Like the least amount of your company you've given up is this. It could be a lot more. The other thing I would say is the benefit of or why I would try to push clients who are raising from angels into using either a convertible note or a safe is because as long as you trip the qualified financing threshold, you're raising $2 million or $3 million or whatever it is, they have no choice but to sign up to the financing documents. It's like they have a covenant to agree to your equity financing docs, which would hopefully be negotiated by like a VC lead investor. And so I think, if you don't want to negotiate those equity terms with folks who might not do this as frequently, you can kind of delay having those negotiations until you're ready to raise from a venture capital fund, and then just drag all your angels, by conversion of their notes or safes into those terms.
The question from before, is the interest on a convertible note determined by some sort of industry standard, or is it just a negotiation?
It's a negotiation, but like it usually, mine are usually 5 to 8.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range.
And it's not actually a cash payment.
What are the interest rates on convertible notes?
The battery's out. So interest on a note is not a cash payment. So you're not actually, it's not like a loan, it's just you get more notes. So what winds up happening is the longer that the note is outstanding, the more dilutive it is. So you may think like, oh, I raised $1 million of notes on a cap of 5 or 4, and a cap of 4, you may think, oh, I'm only going to lose 20% of my company. No, because if the note was clocking at 8% and you had it out for 2 years, you actually have more than $1 million worth of notes.
You should also say that the founder has to remember that even though they're giving shares for that interest, that technically is interest, and as a technical matter, they need to report that interest to the IRS in a form INT, it's called, and that, I'll tell you, some people are kind of unhappy to hear they have to pay taxes on that when they're only getting equity in an illiquid company. I'm not saying this is always perfectly followed, but technically speaking, that's something that is happening, and
what percentage of people do you think are filing?
I'm being a lawyer here. No one's actually doing this, but I have seen people.
None of your clients are doing this. You have heard other
My clients are made aware of this, but unfortunately, that sometimes makes them go to other firms because they don't like hearing that advice.
One more question.
Yeah, so in the little bit of reading I've done about safes, it seems like they're usually, obviously for seed and pre-seed, it usually seems like that's usually a structure for angel investors. Do VCs that do seed funding like working with safes, or do they use them?
I've been in rounds with both. I tend to, in New York, actually, you see less safes than you do in the Valley. So I'd still say it's majority converts in New York, although maybe.
Trending store.
Yeah. But I tend to like converts a little more only because I know that I am at the top of like liquidation preference. So and not to get too technical about it, is if you wind up raising a note and you have safes, like the note is definitely debt, and the note comes out first. So I don't like somebody being above me in that preference. But I've done safes where I've just basically said, like, I have the option to convert to some kind of note to get preference, and I did it in a side letter. So, but yeah, we'll do. VCs who specialize in pre-seed and seed rounds are often doing non-equity rounds.
Just to get a little technical point, safes you don't have to have interest, right? We talked about this little technicality, and we talked about the market being 5 to 8%. Actually, I think it's a little bit lower in the current market. But some people say, well, look, I'll just do a convertible note with no interest. Actually, because it's a note, it's imputed, and there's what's called an applicable federal rate. It's published, I think, like quarterly or something. And that will be imputed and exists whether or not you put it into the document. So just again, a technical point.
Yeah, I'd say one last important point here that Charlie just sort of went into it sideways, but for the company, the safe is going to be the preferred instrument. For the investor is more likely to prefer a convertible note for some of the reasons Charlie mentioned. So, from my perspective as a lawyer, which I'm going to encourage my client to try to get is going to depend on whether I'm talking to a company or talking to an investor. But yes, the convertible note does have advantages to the investor, and so correspondingly on the company side, that's one more reason you should be trying to push your round into a safe. Okay, so we have just a few minutes to tell people everything they want to know about convertible preferred stock, and then securities laws. So we'll move quickly.
Well, I was just going to say, I put outside a cheat sheet for a venture term sheet that explains, there are only like 30 copies, but if someone wants, I can make more. It's a preferred term sheet with every provision explained. So it's like, anyway, we're going to go over it real quick, but it's right outside the door.
Do you want to just jump to Q&A, just in the interest of, because if somebody has a good lawyer, they're going to get.
I think we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I think we should explain just at a high level what we're talking about with preferred stock. Because preferred equity, this is true equity, but it has some features of debt because it gets paid out first before common stock. I mean, that's a essential point to preferred stock. It is for the investors, for that reason, it gives them downside protection to that preferred return. It can be participating so that they get their money out first, as well as sharing in the subsequent distributions as if they had converted. We noted the protected provisions, the veto rights.
Well, that's kind of it can be, but that's a little you guys tell me, in the current market, you're not seeing participating preferred so much. Usually, you make a choice. You get your preferred return, or you convert into common and get on your as converted portion. So, your preferred is your money back, and if there's a dividend, maybe. So, you invest $1 million for 30% of the company, like we were talking about, and the company goes up to be $100 million. Are you just going to take your preferred return? You mean your $1 million back plus your 6% over the 3 years it took, or are you going to convert to $30 million? You can do one or the other. Participating preferred means you get to take your $1 million plus your accumulated dividends and your $30 million. And unless I'm mistaken, that's just not the market today, although I've lived through that market a couple times.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. It's been years since we've done any meaningful amount of participating preferred. It's also called double dip preferred, to go back to Kris's analogy. But that is a feature that can be worked into preferred stock. And I think most of the rest of the slide we talked about. So convertible preferred is sort of at the pantheon of early stage financing. That's at the high end of the different types of instruments that gets used. It is more complicated to negotiate. There are a lot of different provisions that need to be sorted out. It is pretty much the standard in certainly larger VC rounds, not necessarily smaller VC rounds. You can see it in sophisticated angel rounds, although these days I see larger and larger round sizes that are going into safes and convertible notes. That's convertible preferred stock. You can, when you get this slide deck, you can flip through the various terms. The significant things are the liquidation preference. That's the right to get the money out first. Setting the option pool for the employees and when it gets set, either pre-money or post-money. Redemption rights is the right that the investor has to compel the company to buy out the investor after a certain period of time. As a practical matter, it's virtually never exercised, but essentially functions as a hammer, a way that the investors can force the founders to do something that the founders might not otherwise want to do. Anti-dilution protection is the protection that the investors get if there is a subsequent round at a more favorable valuation than the investors have. Protective provisions we've already talked about. Those are the veto rights that the investors get. And we also touched on the board composition. Preferred investors are usually going to get at least one board seat for each round. And there will be various negotiation over the size of the board, who gets how many seats.
Just one. Oh, I forgot my difference.
So we lost our deck.
So just one comment I'll make about preference, and just to keep in mind. You hear about valuations, and you hear like, oh, such and such company, raised $100 million, and now they're worth $1 billion. But like, that's not really true, actually. Somebody did some math and said, okay, if you invested a $900 million pre-money valuation and you put $100 million in, if there was a conversion event and everybody became common stock, then yeah, the $100 million would be 10% of the company, and so by that math, the whole company would be worth $1 billion. What people keep forgetting is if the company sells for 100, that 100 is going right out to the investors, and the entrepreneur's getting nothing, right? So they are taking a preferred piece of equity, the equity that comes out first in a return scenario, in a liquidation preference. So like, yeah, it could be very exciting to raise on a big valuation, but the bigger the round, the more money that is literally sitting on top of you before you see $1 as a founder, before employees see any money. And so all of these types of things, the higher the valuation you want, sometimes you need to make trade-offs. And people say, well, if I'm going to invest in this valuation, I need these extra bells and whistles. I need these preferences. I want the ability to get some interest or whatever to basically say, I want to protect my money because I'm concerned about the valuation. So you wind up sometimes being put in a scenario or making a trade-off as a founder. I'll try and sell less of my company, but in the meantime, I'm increasing the risk that I might not see anything because there's people setting on top of me with preference. Again, with a good legal firm, people who are experienced, they can sort of walk you through the details of it. You don't have to necessarily remember. There's not going to be a quiz at the end of this.
Yeah, I would suggest as a founder, if you have a company that is getting into the 9-figure territory, it is not unheard of. In fact, I think for a lot of our Series B and C, you take some money off the table. Like if someone's putting $100 million into your company, there's no reason you shouldn't get a piece of that just to make you less risk adverse, if for anything. And so like, and we'll encourage investors to say like, let this person buy a condo, a Maserati, some, do some like, crazy things with, and get a couple $1 million so that they can really shoot for an exit that's going to make everybody a lot of money. Because if your whole net worth is tied up in this business and you've got $250 or $300 million of liquidation preference sitting on top of you, you're going to be a lot less risk averse because you've got to sell the company for at least, that much before you see a dollar.
All right, so I'm gonna, Yep.
Hi, I'm Andrew Manho, co-founder and CEO of Lab 141. My co-founder and CTO has this phrase that he uses all the time. Opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one and they all stink. So to Charlie's point about how much to raise.
Speaking of Charlie.
On my deck, we're starting. We manufacture clothes.
So I would say if you're getting people across the table from you who are saying all sorts of things about what you need, you haven't made a strong enough case with enough backup to a particular number, right? And so if somebody if you come in and say, I need 1.5, right? If the other person's like, well, I think it's 3, I think it's 5, whatever, there's probably not enough either detail or backup or specificity because, sometimes I'll say that in a meeting, but we might say, okay, well, so for example, I've done brick and mortar, right? And the founder might say, well, I'm looking for $750 to open 1 location. Well, I might say, well, actually, I think you need $3 million because I think no one's going to care about this business unless it has 3 locations, and that's at least we can look at the numbers and agree that actually there's just a different goal that we should be setting to. If there's that much sort of wavering on how much you need, I would say maybe there's not enough granularity in the discussion about okay, for every $750K that we raise, we hit X milestone. And maybe the person just wants to see you hit a different milestone, but you shouldn't have these wild swings on how much money it takes unless the person's saying, well, I think you need 20 engineers and you only have 5 in the pitch.
All right, so I want to close with, we will have a little bit of time for Q&A again. I want to close and say a few things about securities laws. This is really issue spotting, but I often have clients get tripped up over this, and so I want to stress it. The securities laws apply whenever you are issuing securities. If you're not a registered deal, if you don't have an exemption, if it is neither a registered offering, and if there is not an exemption that you have identified and complied with, and you are issuing securities, then you are issuing securities, likely issuing them illegally. For the purposes of this topic, everything we've been talking about this evening is a security. A safe, convertible note, preferred stock, common stock, whether it is an LLC or whether it's a corporation. And I would say again, this is an area where you should not be going it alone. When it comes to complying with the securities laws, you really need to be talking to a lawyer. What situations are covered by the securities laws? Essentially, any time you're issuing or promising equity to founders, to investors, to employees and consultants, board members, advisors, customers, vendors, landlords, finders, brokers, your dog walker, your mother, anyone who's getting equity in the company, that's a situation that's covered by the securities laws. The good news is they're relatively easy to comply with. As long as if you go to a lawyer, they will help you find likely an exemption that you can comply with relatively easily. For the sorts of investments that we've been talking about this evening, we often use Rule 506B under Regulation D. There are plenty of other exemptions that can be applicable, but I mention that because that is a commonly used one for this type of deal. It permits investments of any size to an unlimited number of accredited investors, no specific written disclosure. There is no general solicitation or advertising prohibited. You cannot put on your website that you are raising a round of financing or something of that nature. It does require a Form D filing, and there may be state filings required. A couple of other things I'm going to mention. If you are working with a finder, this also comes up with my clients frequently. Often people have a finder, they're paying a commission for raising money.
If you're raising a seed round, don't work with a finder.
Yes, well,
I mean, like, just realistically, like, I literally won't take a deal. Well, I won't take a pitch from a broker. Because, like, if you, in New York, can't find a VC to pitch to directly, or find someone who knows someone, then, like, somebody who's like, oh yeah, I'll raise that round for you for like, you know what those people do? You know how many irrelevant spam emails I get of like, hey, here's a company in Arizona, I'm raising a B round and whatever. It's like, those are the broker deals, and I would just not recommend using finders or brokers to raise your first round of capital.
I would certainly agree with that. I think it happens rarely, and generally it is not necessary for the types of rounds we're talking about. However, it does happen, and if you do it, make sure you're working with a registered broker-dealer, because if you're working with an unregistered broker-dealer, it can create all sorts of difficulties. So that's for issue spotting. If you find yourself in that situation, speak with your lawyer. The consequences of non-compliance with the securities laws can be significant. SEC or state enforcement, civil or criminal penalties, including for the officers and directors, rescission rights, that's you have to give people their money back. It can become a disclosure issue that will stay with you for the life of your company. It could potentially derail an IPO or an acquisition. I can't say that's a likely scenario, but it is certainly a potential scenario. Bottom line, if you comply with the securities laws timely, it can be usually done relatively easily and inexpensively, but if you don't do it timely, it can be a real headache. For the lawyers, anything to add?
What's your rate?
It depends. Yeah, so how much does it cost to do an equity financing or a SAFE for notes? SAFEs are super, super inexpensive. Easy for me to say, it's not my money, I guess, but like they're designed to be signed as is, and so there shouldn't be any negotiation. And so as long as you don't have any side letters or that sort of thing, I actually just tell my clients to fill in the details, number, the amount invested in valuation, cap, discount, investor name, and just start signing them up, and then just send them to me as they execute them. Convertible note I want to be involved in, and that can range, a couple $1,000. But for in terms of fees for an equity financing, usually the company's going to pay for the lead investor's fees, which can range anywhere from $10,000 to several hundred thousands if you're in the later stage. But like for a Series A, maybe it's 25 or 35 investor side fees. And what I usually tell clients is usually since we're doing more work, it's at least 1x investor side fees, but it can be 1.5. Yeah. So another reason to kind of use safes as much as possible, because you can, as long as you're not negotiating, you can basically print them off the internet and get them signed up. Now Goodwin can talk about their fees. So let's get some intel.
What we try to do is be somewhat selective with our early stage clients, and to the extent we can, we actually try to defer the fees until there is a financing round. So we'll form the company, kind of like the GUS program. We have a tool on our website that enables the founders to do most of it on their own, and then it kind of comes to us where a lawyer's involved, so we make it pretty easy. It's called our Founders Workbench on our Goodwin website, and so we try to manage it in that way by just not doing a zillion startups, because it is expensive and time consuming, but sort of selectively work with companies. And the fees, to set up a company is to just actually set it up as an LLC or a C Corp is people can do that entirely on their own for a couple $100. If you want to really do it right, it's a couple $1,000. And then to do the financing, again, a SAFE is just a couple $1,000 to organize all the documents. A convertible promissory note financing is usually more like in the $10,000 range. And then a Series A, depending on its complexity, is again, if it goes straight through, it's $20,000 to $30,000 typically. All of these, I'm in total agreement that I've done an A round that was a total mess because of all the stuff that came before that cost like $150,000. Fortunately, they were raising like $30 million in that case. But you try to be sensitive as a lawyer. You enter into these arrangements. You're not really making money off of forming these companies and doing that first round. We formed a company called Moderna 3.5 years ago and just took it public for $640 million at a $7 million valuation. We made some money there, and that paid off that early investment with our client.
Okay, good. I might just add one more thing on the legal fees. I agree with what Randall and Kris have said, although I would say use a lawyer enough so that you understand what you're getting yourself into. I mean, it's not filling out the SAFE that is, necessarily where you need a lawyer. It's understanding the SAFE and understanding how it works, and like the Randall was talking about the calculations, so you can figure out what the dilution is going to be and understand what the rights are and how they work. If you don't understand that, that may be where you need a lawyer, not necessarily filling out the documents. Similarly, Randall says that fill them out and send them to him. That works, but again, be cognizant of securities filings. If you're going to properly do your Form D filings, you do need to be working with your lawyer to make sure that gets properly handled. So, sure.
And I would just say generally there are instances where startups feel like they can, scrimp a little bit and save a little money here and there. Oh, my cousin's a lawyer, all that sort of stuff. And like, anytime I hear that, it's like, wait, your cousin's a lawyer at a venture law firm, or just like, just a lawyer, right? Because those inevitably wind up being the most expensive financings. Because, my lawyer will go in there and realize like all the equity agreements are screwed up, the options agreements are screwed up, nothing's been filed properly, and then there's like a whole bunch of cleanup. So whatever money you like thought you saved in the beginning, you wind up sort of spending later on.
It's like the Facebook situation. They have documents that say, "You hereby own 10% of my company," forever. It's a nightmare.
And also, don't pick lawyers based on. I get a lot of questions about your billable rate. Don't pick lawyers based on billable rate, because the billable hour is relevant, of course, but if you're working with an expert who does this exclusively and can do it in 1/10, someone who kind of is a real estate lawyer but will review your equity financing documents, it doesn't matter if they charge half as much an hour if it's going to take them 10 times as long to do it as someone who could literally write these documents in their sleep.
Yeah, I think the other point is conserving cash is important, but really try to run your business as if you're diligence ready from day one. Because you're going to be going through due diligence through probably several rounds of financing during the life cycle of your company.
Does legal ever take equity in the firm versus upfront costs?
We don't do equity for fees, but we do have a venture fund that the partners use to invest in companies using their own money.
In the old days, like the 90s, we did, not so long ago for me,
But firms stop doing that. The only time they'll take equity is if a company gets in real trouble, and that's the only way to help them out of it. At least that's what my firm does.
My firm is the same way. The only situation we end up taking equity for fees is when that's all that's left. But to be more serious, there are some firms that still do that, but generally speaking, I don't think there aren't many firms that are doing that. At least not as many as there used to be.